Good evening, hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Frontline Club. Fantastic to see so many of you here, some new faces and some old faces as well. Can I just say before we start, if there is a seat in the middle and you could perhaps move up so people could get in, we'd really appreciate it because we're expecting a few more people and it would just really help. If you could just move up by one spot, that would be great. Thank you very much. So this is the On the Media event for this month, and thanks for making it. We're going to talk about data and journalism, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker in just a second. So this is a stream event we do every month, and next month, just to give you a plug, is on the 12th of October, and we're talking about TV journalism and where all that's headed. So we've got some fantastic people, so please come down to that as well. We do these in association with the BBC College of Journalism, so thanks to them. Please turn your phones to silent. But please use those phones to tweet about this event. And we very much appreciate it if you add the hashtag Frontline Club, and hopefully we'll keep the debate going and share some knowledge. And we're going to have a blog post of this. We're going to add some of the speakers' presentations if they'll allow us, and so you can see some things again. And we're going to have questions at the end of each speech, and then if there's time, we're going to do some at the end as well. So if you've got any burning questions, just keep those in the back of your head. So our first speaker is Simon Rogers from The Guardian. He's the editor of The Guardian's Datablog and the Data Store. So Simon, would you like to come on up? There he is. Okay, round of applause, please. Go on.
Can I give the hashtag?
The hashtag again?
No, the hashtags for each speaker. The hash name.
Oh, Twitter handles.
Oh, the Twitter handles, yes. So if we could ask yes, if the speakers could please tell the audience their Twitter names, that would be great. And without further ado, Simon Rogers, please.
So I have two Twitter accounts, just to make things confusing. There's @DataStore, which is the Guardian's data blog kind of Twitter feed, and also there's my own, which is substantially less popular, which is @SMFRogers. So I suppose what I was going to do is, we don't have very long to talk. You really don't want to hear me kind of rambling on. What I was going to do really was talk about this whole area and what we do at The Guardian, with a bit of kind of going through stuff we've done on the website. So the first thing really is about this whole area is that there's a kind of awful lot of rubbish spoken about even now, that it's not real journalism, that it's, you know, horror of horrors might be research, as if that's different to journalism, and that it's all brand new and different. I suppose what I want to start saying is actually none of the stuff that we're going to talk about really is particularly new, just that the way we do it and the kind of tools we have are. So this is, that one on the left there is by a well-known data journalist, Florence Nightingale, thank you. And what she did was she did a big report when she came back from the Crimea, which is about how members of the British Army were basically being killed by diseases, preventable stuff, rather than by bullets. And this graphic here on the left shows the little red kind of thing, we can kind of see that pointy thing, is basically wounds in combat, and the big kind of grey thing is preventable diseases. And she also had bar charts in this big report, and the one on the bottom right is by a guy called William Playfair, who invented the pie chart and the bar chart and the line chart, and was not a designer. He was a gambling addict, I believe, and an alcoholic, but not a designer. And you know, as The Guardian has a tradition with data too, this is the very first edition of The Guardian from May 1821. News was not on the front page, led by an advert for a lost black Labrador. But on the back, we did have news, and a big part of the back page is a table of data, essentially. This is data about schools in Manchester, which is the Manchester Guardian. And at the time, the official data on education was basically compiled by priests and people who ran the schools. They obviously had a vested interest. And this was independently compiled by somebody who said something along the lines of, without proper data and proper information, how can we know how society is progressing or how things are changing? Which is a good rationale for everything that we're doing, I believe. We've moved on a little bit in the way that we use data. This is something we do every year, which is basically spending by a government department. Now, you'd think that you could just ring up the Treasury and you get that data, you know, sent to you in a spreadsheet, perhaps, you know. But unfortunately, not in this country. You have to go through, to get that, we had to go through every departmental annual report and get the data out of PDF tables and work it out for ourselves. And when we publish this, we've had like 2 or 3 government departments contact us to get copies of it because they don't have that information, including, worryingly, the Central Office for Information. So obviously we produce this kind of stuff. My background to doing this job is I'm a news editor, but I'm working with graphics in terms of kind of providing information. I started kind of collecting more and more just spreadsheets and data. And so I'm going to start to think, well, wouldn't it be good if we just published that data? So what I'm going to do is talk through kind of our approach to that and how we did it. So basically, around the time that we launched the Guardian's Open Platform, which is an API for kind of interrogating Guardian content, we thought it would just be a good idea to launch the Datablog. And what we decided to do, I'm going to just kind of show you through a typical Datablog post, is we would start publishing data using Google spreadsheets, which we did because it was, easy to share and, very simple. Everybody could access it, better than downloading Excel sheets. So what we'd do is we would publish data kind of like this. Doing a Google spreadsheet, we'd put in country codes where we could, so you could use the data with other sets of data and make them kind of work together. You can download that as CSV or XML or as XLS, whatever you need, and it'd be kind of accessible. And what we thought when we started doing this was that we would, maybe a few developers would look at the site, and that would be it. But what we actually found was that what was happening was increasingly real people were going to site because they wanted to find out bits of information. They wanted to find out what carbon emissions were or how their country compares on poverty and so on. And we started using it as a showcase for people's graphics as well. So David, for instance, has posted something on the site today, which is pretty neat. This is about the tax gap, which we're all talking about at the moment, uncollected tax, and kind of how that works, and maybe David will talk a bit about that later. But basically what we wanted to do was be a place that people would talk about data and work with data. And I think part of this comes from the fact that, that journalism used to be a very much kind of closed profession. That journalists, we would collect this information and kind of throw it out into the world for the grateful public to receive, in a very much kind of one-way process. That has changed a lot now in the sense that we're not the experts anymore. We're not necessarily the people who know best how to use information or what to do with it. So what we've done, part of this, is also to run stuff through Twitter. We encourage people to send us visualizations as our Flickr group as well. People can join, they send us visualizations with our data or even with other data they found. And basically what we're trying to do is encourage a kind of a community around data, the idea that there are millions of people out there actually who we want to hear from because they'll know better about things than we will. So one of the people who's done something with our data is a guy called Tony Hurst at the Open University. So this, for instance, is we took the MP's expenses overall data, which the House of Commons publishes as a PDF, of course, which means you can't copy it, you can't do anything with it. And what we did is we turned that data into a spreadsheet because we wanted to get kind of top-level results out of it. And then Tony Hurst took that stuff and he threw it all over Google Maps. So basically, if you took, say, travel expenses there, you get different MPs who are next to each other and have completely different expenses. So Angus Robertson there claimed 27 grand, and let's see who this person is. Alex Salmon only claimed 6,000. So you just get a really nice, simple story from something just by throwing it at a map in a way that we didn't have the technical know-how to do. And of course, when the full government expenses were released, you get a different situation because with this, at least we've got a nice kind of compressed set of data. With that, you've got hundreds of thousands of PDFs. So when that was released, we thought, well, we can't physically enter all this stuff. It's all handwritten receipts and PDFs and so on. So what we did was we created a kind of crowdsourcing application. Crowdsource, of course, is a modern word for survey. Basically, what we did was we put all the documents online, so made them easier to find, partly because actually on the Commons website they weren't that easy to find. So you could find your MP, and then we asked people to go on there and look at the pages, and then and tell us what was on them, kind of enter line items and so on. So you get these hideous PDFs like that. This is great central government transparency. Basically, every interesting detail on there has been redacted, which means blocking off. So a lot of the stories that were in the Telegraph at the time about MP's expenses came from people flipping houses. But if you remove the address field from a receipt, how are you going to tell that it's about that? But anyway, so we set this up, and it did really, really well in the first couple of days. Got over 1 million hits in a day. Very, very popular. But in the long run, you realise that actually it's just such a big job. 458,000 pages of documents. 221,000 have been reviewed, which is pretty good, but it's not the whole lot. And what we did find, which was an interesting feature of it, is that lots of people went on at first when it was in the news. They were interested. They wanted to find out what was going on. But then what happened is that you got the obsessives going on. That was it. So there was one user who's a bit of a hero, whose username was Eat My Poverty, who was reviewed over 29,000 pages. Now, kind of somebody who looks at 29,000 pages probably knows more about MPs' expenses than our entire political staff. So I hope none of them are watching this. But suddenly they're an expert. And what I think stuff like this is good for, it really helped us with, was identifying stories and picking out news. In terms of producing data, not so much. The second time we did it, the second release of data, was another 40,000 odd pages. And with that, we kind of thought what worked with this is creating tasks, making it a bit more fun. So we had tasks on this like, just look for Labour MPs, or just look for the shadow cabinet, or interesting MPs. And within about a week and a half, all the pages were done. So, it kind of taught us a lot about getting information out of the data. How am I doing for time? Oh, cool. Good. OK, so crowdsourcing for us so far has been an interesting process, and what it's done is generate stories for us, but hasn't produced kind of data, I would say. So kind of moving on, what we're in a situation with now is that the government is increasingly releasing huge data sets, things that don't really work in Excel. 3 or 4 million items. This is the Coins database, and the Coins database is basically the Treasury's internal spending spreadsheet. It's basically every item of spending is collected on this database, and it hasn't been published before. The last government kind of would talk a bit about it, but not actually publish it. There's a lot of campaigning to get it released, and the dream was that we would all have, how much was spent on my street by local and central government. That didn't quite happen. But what they did produce was this millions and millions and millions item spreadsheet in millions of kind of confusing and diverse formats. And what we thought the best thing we could do to that was basically help people find their way around it. So what we did was we would, because it's published like every month, it'd be the financial year to that month. So if you get it in May, and it'd be April to May, you get it in June, you get April to June. So what we do is we take the end of the financial year for each year, and just kind of, because also it's kind of like a balance sheet, so you'd have minus spending on it and plus spending and so on. So basically what we produced was the end of the year, the most easily understandable stuff, help people filter it, try and get stories out of it. And this was an internal tool for our reporters to kind of find their way around the data, as well as an external tool for users to help kind of pick out stories and identify stories. And we did get stories out of that. We got how much government spends on consultants, how much is owed to the government in bad debts, and so on. And then we've got another huge data set, which is this. Now, the Wikileaks thing is just an amazing kind of example of how this kind of data journalism could work with very traditional and expert journalism. So what we had there was a spreadsheet of 92,000 items, and what we did was, there are several things that we did with this. There's the internal task of making the database easier for Guardian reporters to use. Now, is Nick, are you still here, Nick? Yeah. Yeah, hi. So, okay, well, Nick, maybe talk about how you use that. But basically, one of our editorial experts basically created an internal database that made it easier, just very, very quickly, for people to find stories and to just find stuff they're looking for. So we have people like Declan Walsh, being in Afghanistan, knows about certain events and certain incidents, would use it to find that instance, see how it compares to his kind of notes on that. But then also, externally, we decided that we didn't want to publish the whole lot. There are all the issues about confidentiality and sources and so on. What we did do is we focused particularly on IED attacks, because this seemed to be a lot of the story about the war in Afghanistan has been the huge rise in IED attacks. So what we could do with that is, because the data was very, very precise geographic data, we could do stuff like this. That's every single IED attack in Afghanistan. But also what we could do, which is something that only kind of really works online, is do something like this. Wait a sec, it'll load. Okay, so this is an interactive of that data. And basically what the guys did, which is fantastic, is mapped it out. You can see it over time. So you can see how there are lots of attacks, then suddenly there's a big, big rise, which through 2008, 2009. Now, is that journalism? I think it is, because it tells you a story, and tells an amazing story. And I think that we were in a place where we could help, of course, kind of deal with that data because of our experience with data journalism and with coins and so on. And the other interesting thing about the story was that, people talk about, the internet replacing traditional journalism, but actually what made the story for The Guardian was the fact that you had specialist journalists who could look at the data and bring out real stories out of it. So kind of the two things working side by side. So I'm going to talk about a couple of other things. So what we're in a position now is where our kind of role in data is changing a bit. And one thing we've started doing is thinking about, there's all this data out there, and suddenly we're asking people to publish it, and they are publishing it, governments are publishing it. And maybe our role is to help people kind of find that data and rank it and help us with it. So this is one thing which we've done with the increased kind of government data websites. We've set up a search here, and what this does, this searches all of these official open data sites around the world, including that one in Spanish, and brings back results from it. So say you're interested in, I don't know, crime. There you go. And so it brings you back results from the UK, Australia, the US, the District of Columbia, Seattle, and so on. And say you're interested in that data. We're also asking people to help us by ranking the information and also submitting kind of visualizations and applications. People have submitted things like, for instance, one of the data sets being released is this kind of live feed of London's traffic cameras. And somebody's developed an iPhone app, you can actually watch these kind of live cameras. Stuff like that. So it's kind of, that's where we're moving. And then we've, as part of our new development site, we've done the same kind of thing, but just with development data. So again, trying to make it easier for people to find it, easier for people to use it. So this is about the Millennium Development Goals. So you've got all the data, the relevant data for each goal. That, we make it easy to download and easy to do something with. So kind of, I suppose, where are we going? We're in this weird place where we're basically becoming a kind of data provider. We had something like twice as many page impressions as the Office for National Statistics on a monthly basis, which is kind of this weird place where actually more people are coming to us for data than the ONS, which is crazy because the ONS has thousands of data sets, and it's a kind of national jewel that's misserved by the world's worst website. But in the future, kind of we're going to become a source for data. So our role becomes as a source, but also as kind of interpreters, I suppose, for data, and also hopefully as a way for people that are interested in data, as a central point for them to come to us to talk about it and help us analyse it and help us do stuff with it. There you go.
So, round of applause, please. Simon? Now, does anybody have a question for Simon about the data store, about the Datablog, and the things that Guardian News and Media are doing? If you could just say who you are and ask away.
Hi, my name is Martin Robson. For the Iraq WikiLeaks stuff that's coming up, how differently might you approach 500,000 documents?
So not allowed to talk about that. No.
The things you might do differently. You said after coins you could do...
What kind of lessons that we learn from this? I think that it's different because Afghanistan's such a current story and the interest is so great, and it'd be really interesting to see the interest is the same. I think that what we learned, it took us a while to get to the place where we were providing useful information for the reporters inside The Guardian. I think that was probably too long, and so the stuff we've learned about handling big databases has been really invaluable. I was looking at a database today, which is this Department of Transport thing, which is published on Datablog.uk. It's like enormous. What they do is they take a week's worth of transport information about every public transport journey across the UK, like buses, coaches, trains, and they put it all into a spreadsheet, like enormous spreadsheets, like loads of them, and then they're divided up by region. And I had no idea what to do with this data. So one thing I did do, because I picked up on one thing, which is a list of every bus stop in Britain and kind of where it is. Like, oh, that's interesting. So I'd start with that and know that we're going to publish that tomorrow morning. But actually, what we've done with that is we're asking people to help us use that data and go through it. And I kind of think, actually, with WikiLeaks, it's a difficult thing because we don't want to publish the whole lot. We've made that decision. So we can't necessarily put out that call. What we can do is publish kind of discrete sets and help people, guide people through the data. So I suppose that's where we're going with any future things that might come up.
Anyone else got time for a couple more? I will take one from back there after.
Hi, my name's Anne. I'm a freelancer. I'm wondering, with crowdsourcing and asking people to interpret data, if someone makes a mistake, if they get a decimal point in the wrong place or they get something wrong, what are the legal implications of that?
Well, that's why I think, I said earlier, I think crowdsourcing for us doesn't produce meaningful data, or it hasn't yet. But I think in the long run, you have to have kind of credible source of data. And say with the MP spends, we had the problem that people were double entering the same receipts. For instance, you get the same stuff entered twice. So how do you check that up? So this is something we're kind of grappling with in the future. But obviously, crowdsourcing is a big part of what the Guardian is planning to do in the future. So we have to look at kind of how we might get meaningful figures out of that.
Hi, Rich Sutcliffe. What kind of resources do you need in the sort of team that you work with? I mean, a lot of what you're doing is creating tools for other people to search the data, or your own journalists search the data. What kind of team does it involve to put that effort, put those tools together?
It's quite a small team, and up to now it's mainly been me. But we do have a lot of support in that we've got the Guardian's editorial support department, brilliant at getting data out of PDFs. Which is like a full-time job, pretty much. And we've got the Guardian's technical team, and so when there were tasks, like with the Wikileaks stuff, there was tasks, and there were a group of people we got kind of assigned to that task. But in the future, we're getting more resources, and because it's a more important part, of where the Guardian's going, this whole area. So. But yeah, I mean, but in terms of, I mean, one of the things that I was going to say, one of the myths about this thing is you've got to be a programmer, or you've got to have, be able to write code. And I don't think you have to at all, because a lot of the tools we use are just there. Everybody's got Excel or a spreadsheet program which allows you to do pivot tables, or something that will tell you what you need. It's not rocket science. It's not that difficult. A lot of what we're doing. It's more like treating numbers as if they're journalistic, instead of being kind of scared of them.
We've got time for one more gentleman here. Sorry, we have more time for questions at the end if there's time.
Sorry, Gareth Simpkins from the ENDS report. It's a terribly geeky question, but what software are you using to produce these flash displays?
Oh, the flash stuff. That is like deep, hardcore flash stuff that I'm not really knowledgeable. I think that was actually HTML. Some of the stuff is we use HTML5 increasingly, which is more troublesome than Flash. But we've got some really good Flash people. A guy called Alistair Dant, who's the kind of Grandmaster Flash at the Guardian, is just done. It's his. He told me that was his nickname, but that's not good. But so he's really good with Flash. And people like that, are great. What they call out for, they cry out for, is just real data in a usable format, and that's kind of where we come in.
And I might be massively putting you on the spot, Mr. Davis. I don't know whether you. Hello, Nick. Would you mind just saying a few words about WikiLeaks and your involvement and things? Okay. I've read just about this, but would you mind?
I don't mind. I haven't got anything to say.
No.
Okay, so I'm Nick Davis. I write for The Guardian. And I was responsible for bringing in this Afghan WikiLeaks story. In a way, what strikes me as most surprising excuse me, is how little crowdsourcing reaction has gone on since WikiLeaks published all the data. I haven't seen any significant analysis of that raw material. Have you?
No, interestingly, the phone calls I got were people had journalists who pick on their country, and look, like from Finland or somewhere, who'd look for Finnish troops there or something. Yeah. But we I have had emails from American academics who said they were worried about using the data because they didn't want to get sued at a further point, which is insane. There's obviously a culture of a bit of fear about it. But also, it's too big for most people to handle. There is that too.
Maybe that's it. But I mean, there were all sorts of angles that we never got to, because there was so much of it. So, for example, there was a category of material which was recorded by the US military as being likely to create negative publicity. So you would think somebody would search all those entries and put them together and then compare them with what they actually put out in press releases. Yeah. It's a reasonably limited exercise. I haven't seen anybody do that. Or I haven't seen anybody do anything about the treatment of detainees, which is recorded in there. We got, 6 or 7 good thematic stories out of it. I would think there are dozens of others there. Yeah. So there's some kind of flaw, it seems to me, in the theory that crowdsourcing, if that's what we're calling it, is a realistic way of converting data into information, into stories, because it doesn't seem to be happening. Yeah.
No, I agree. And part of the problem is a lot of the stuff is really faffy. It's hard work and boring and tedious to go through, and I think actually, there's a limited number of people who are interested in doing that. Perhaps, I don't know. So far,
you need journalists.
Yes.
Okay, we have one more question. Because she runs the club, she definitely gets to ask it. So.
I was just going to ask: has the Guardian made a decision to be involved or not to be involved with the next release of the next 15,000 documents of WikiLeaks?
We've already seen all that.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, Nick knows much more about this than I do, but...
So is the Guardian involved with the release? Yeah?
I haven't got a microphone. Shall I? Julian Assange, who's responsible for WikiLeaks, is the world's most confused and confusing man. So he gave me, and I passed on to The Guardian, 92,000 documents which constituted the Afghan war logs. We warned him that he must not put this material unredacted onto the WikiLeaks website because it was highly likely to get people killed. And he never really got his head around that, but at the last moment, he did a kind of word search through these 92,000 documents, looking for words like source or human intelligence, and withdrew 15,000 documents that had those kind of words in. So it was a very inefficient way of making the documents safe, and I'm worried by what's been posted up on there. He then kind of presented the withholding of these 15,000 documents as though this was some new super secret that was about to be released. But it's already been released. We've been through all that material already. So it's a complete distraction, the other 15,000. But the amount of confusion around Julian is just immeasurable. And I mean, in general terms, you could say he's obviously got other material coming through WikiLeaks. And there are all sorts of possibilities about who might get involved in processing it. Personally, I feel much happier pursuing the phone hacking, which is a relatively clean story that Julian's not involved in.
OK. We're going to have to move on. We've got a lot of great speakers. But please thank Simon Rogers and Nick Davis. And thanks, Nick, for me putting you on the spot there. Interesting stuff. So I'm just going to... OK, so moving swiftly on, our next speaker is Julian Burgess, who's an editorial developer at The Times. So give a round of applause for Julian, please.
Hi, thank you for the Frontline Club for inviting me. I'm quite nervous up here because I'm not actually a journalist. I'm actually a developer, so I write software, but in the editorial sort of area of The Times. And I have a counterpart who's not here tonight, unfortunately, called Jonathan Richards, who is a journalist. And I've sort of slowly taught him to program over the last couple of years, and we work together as a team. And so I'm going to sort of talk through some of the stuff that we've done, and sort of a little bit about how we do it as well. I'm used to normally talking to very technical audiences, so I think there's only one slide with some code on it. But feel free to interrupt me if I go on about any acronyms or something which doesn't make any sense. Just put your hand up. And it's quite a short talk as well, so there's lots of time for questions as well. So leading on from Simon's talk, I think the idea of publishing data is fantastic. Definitely, you know, if you've got data, then linking either directly to the source or publishing it yourself if it's something you've come across firsthand. So we were running this blog for a bit. This was before our paywall went up, so it's not alive anymore, really. So one of the things this was just something I saw on Wired, and they just sort of had this graph which sort of showed the BMI of playmates over the year, and they just sort of drawn this sort of best fit line. I just thought, no way does that look like a best fit line. And so I sort of redrew it, and you can see that's actually a 24-month rolling average. And it was supposed to show that models were getting thinner and thinner, and it didn't actually show that when you looked at it. They just sort of dipped in about sort of 1980 or something like that, and have crept up since then. And of course, the advantage of publishing it is that, you know, there might be things. I mean, it was good because Wired did actually publish this data, so it was just there, and it was trivial for me to just download it and regraph it and come up with something that was different. And it was probably good for them as well because they again probably got more debate and traffic out of it. So this was something we did. It's not in 2007. There's been, as you probably know, there's been an awful lot of calls for releasing data, and this was something that was released very early on, which the Department of Transport, I think they were sort of shouted at and said, you've got to release something. And they were like, oh, and they came up with this and put it out. And it was actually, it was not great data, and it was actually just a very long, it was about 12,000 instances where there'd been some kind of bicycle accident. And it was actually just a sort of comma-separated list of, I think, I forget the name for it, ordnance survey points. And you can't actually take an ordnance survey point and put it straight onto Google Maps. So there was a bit of code sort of involved in order to plot it. And some of them are a bit strange, because there's one that was sort of happening about 7 miles out to sea, which seems a bit unlikely for cycling. But yeah, so we plotted that, and that was very interesting, because it sort of allowed people to sort of see exactly near to where they are. And it's not. There is a bit of coding, and there were some tools which were developed, I think, by some branch of UCL, which we used in this, which were very handy. So this was something which we did. It's surprising often when you work somewhere how difficult it can be even to get at your own data. And what we were wanting to look at was how the sort of usage of words had changed and sort of grown within the times. And we actually wrote a script which kind of queried our own search sort of engine internally, I think it was, sort of looking at how words had sort of grown and fallen, sort of. And these are actually normalised as well, because the actual total number of articles we're publishing dramatically increases. That's between, I think, 1985 and 2008. But yeah, that was just a sort of a good example of where we're sort of using code internally. This was something where this was a little while ago, but there was that sort of BNP leak that was of their membership database. And that was quite poor quality data when it was released. It was just basically one big text file with sort of things roughly on a couple of lines, and so that had to be sort of parsed out. And then we sort of geocoded that to work out which constituents they're in, because that was the best map that we had available at the time. And then sort of coded that based on how many members there were. It was interesting, some of the questions we got, because that was quite early on, some of the questions we sort of got asked by editors were sort of things like, could you tell us how many people are male or female? And we said, well, no, we've just got their name and their address. And, there's sort of some things you can tell quite easy. So we sort of like compared which email domains had most. I can't remember which one it was. I won't say it, probably be libelous. But yeah, so sort of trying to explain some of these sort of things, what you can do and what you can't do. There's things which are things often very easy in programming, or impossible practically. This was something actually I can show you that as well. But this was when WikiLeaks released. What's happened here? The that work? Yeah, so they released a huge number of pager messages which had been collected on September 11th, and so as a source of data, it's quite interesting, because it was actually quite big. But a lot of our usual tactics, which I'll sort of explain more later, which we would use on it, didn't really work on this, because there's a tremendous amount of automated pager alerts, which we hadn't sort of really thought about. There's always pagers saying this server's working or this air conditioning unit's working, and so there was actually, I don't know how many there were in total. It says somewhere on that post, but we filtered it down to just a very small set, and then we were kind of like, well, what's the most interesting thing with this? And we kind of thought that actually it was most interesting. Just we were reading through it, and we thought just reading them on their own probably had the best sort of journalistic impact, and so in the end we just sort of went with this thing which just sort of faded them through and sort of was picking them at random. We sort of say what the process was in order to actually filter them, because obviously it's not a representative sample exactly. It's just something we sort of thought which would be more interesting. Oh no. Sorry. So I also covered the general election, which was quite a task in terms of data. So this was one of the sort of the main sort of output, where we had a map of showing all the constituencies, which had sort of changed boundaries this year. So that was quite confusing. It was quite tricky to show any comparisons between this year and the previous year. So a very clever mathematician had sort of come up with this formula which coloured the map, sort of how it would have been if it had been like that at the last election. And we actually then looked at putting a lot of data into it, because one of the things we'd sort of spent a lot of money and time building this map, but it's obviously of most interest on the night. And so we wanted to try and make it more interesting before the election particularly. And Ladbrokes this year, and I think some other bookmakers, had actually put together pricing on every single seat. So we were able to pull that data in, along with some poll data and also comment data and things like that. And it was quite a good. It was tricky, because obviously you had to do it quite regularly. So we could have done it as regularly as we wanted, but these people only updated on a sort of daily basis. So we'd pull in this data, and then we had to sort of match it to all the constituencies, and there's obviously so many different ways of spelling constituency names, and it all got quite confusing. And in the end, we were actually then pushing some of the data back to Ladbrokes and saying, look, you've spelt all these wrong. Here's the corrected ones. We'll just fix your spelling for you, and you do it that way. Oh, yeah, so here's some code here, it's an obligatory code slide. So actually, does anyone here program? You're all just journalists, are you? Oh, you program, that's good. A couple? Handful. So, no, I mean, I think, as Simon said, it's not something you have to do, but I think it's one of those things, if you've got the brain for it, some people have, their mind just clicks and they can code very easily, then it's very helpful because it can allow you to do things that manually would take a very long time. So this particular method here is actually for working out when, that was it, because often the odds for these elections, constituencies, they would actually give the same odds for two parties, and we had to work out some way to sort of say which one we thought would be likely to win. So we did it based on what the previous election was. So we favoured the incumbent, and that was the code to pick the incumbent. Right. So on the talk presentation on the website, it sort of said, what would you do if you were presented suddenly with data? So I thought I'd sort of just say about what I'd do. So the first thing is don't panic. I mean, it's easy to. One of the things I sort of often keep in my mind, even as a developer, is you just have to think all of this is just binary. There's just sort of zeros and ones in there which mean something, and you just have to sort them out and make them presentable. One of the big things also is to get hold of the actual data. I often have people come to me and say, we've got this fantastic data that's going to come. It's going to be brilliant, and then it turns up and it's just some enormous PDF which you can't actually do anything with. So you don't make any commitments until you've actually got hold of the data. Once you have got hold of it, try and turn it into something that you can actually look at. It will often be in sort of, spread across a whole load of sort of spreadsheets or PDFs or something like that. So CSV is my favourite format by quite a margin usually, because I can put that into Excel and I can put it into databases. Oh, sorry, CSV is comma-separated values, and it's about as simple as it could get in that you just write something, then a comma, then something else, and then if you put that into Excel, those commas are where it splits the things to put them into cells. That hopefully explains it. Yes, I would then do things like I'd sort of count the number of items as well, because very often sort of people will tell you that this thing has 80,000, and you look at it and there's only 14,000, or there's 160,000 or something like that, and because it's very important to check that you're actually working on the file that people thought you were, and that you often find there's a lot of issues like that. What types of things, whether if they're using dates, whether they're actually correct dates, whether they're sort of ranges. That sort of thing, and just generally sort of seeing if it makes any sense. I get a lot of data where you look at it, and particularly government data, and you're just like, what on earth is this? There was with the coins information, there was a whole load of developers having a big chat on the day it came out, and just going, is this pence? Is it pounds? Millions of pounds? And we were sort of trying to work it out by finding the largest number and going, no, it couldn't be millions of pounds. That would be more money than all the world put together or something. So finding out some of those limits. Yeah, so I would run a lot of basic reports. You can do this very easily in Access and also in Excel. Just find out the sort of the smallest and minimum, the biggest values and the longest and shortest strings, because often that's very important if you're displaying it on the page as well, where you have some ridiculously long named town in Wales or something like that will break everything. Doing counts by categories if they're available. Looking at what things can be joined to other tables as well, where it's very nice when you come across some data which has useful IDs in them, such as we had some stuff on schools, and I forget the exact name of it, but this ID, you could then basically go to Ofsted and you could get back reports based on that school. And it just made it fantastic, because you weren't then having to join up these names. You weren't having to work out whether two very similarly named schools were actually the same school. Looking for hidden metadata is very interesting in terms of journalism, because you forget there's often, so timestamps are a fantastic thing. So where it's sort of, that means that sort of something is sort of said exactly when it's happened. And so if you know when people have accessed files, I mean, if you're doing something and you sort of say, well, why is this happening at midnight? Is that usual? Is it? And or just drawing a sort of histogram showing the number of accesses over time, or the frequency as well. Perhaps you could actually work out whether two people were doing something at the same time, because it's happening too frequently for it to just be one person doing this. Telephone numbers are interesting as well, because you can actually sort of relate those back to sort of geographic information quite often, and IP addresses the same thing. Version numbers as well. You might get a database which sort of shows how many times something has been edited, and you might find that it'd be worth checking through to check they're actually sequential. If you suddenly find it goes from version 12 to version 26, you're like, well, what happened to all those in between? Maybe some data's been removed. And a similar thing with checksums, where you can check that actually the data is verified. That was a nice quote I read the other day from Charles Babbage, which was sort of saying, how a lot of people still don't seem to understand that the quality of the data is what you put in is sort of very much what you get out. So an awful lot of our time is spent checking data just for quality and cleaning it, which is not a fun task, and it's something you can sometimes automate, but sometimes automating it just doesn't work at all. And there's often a time I'm copying and pasting and swearing at data. So some of the tools that I use, your mileage may vary on these, but I use spreadsheets a lot. I tend to mainly use OpenOffice, but Google Docs and Excel are very handy as well. I use a lot of the Unix console tools, which I won't go into in detail, but basically there's a lot of tools which you just type in the command line. They look very scary, but they're actually fantastically good. grep is a particularly good one, which is it basically just searches through text files. And the thing that's so good about it is it's incredibly fast. It will just wipe the floor with any other program you use. So, searching through gigabytes of text is not a problem for grep. Using SQL as well, when a database gets sort of too big, or you're doing a lot of joins, or quite often it maybe comes in a format that's very easy to put into a SQL database. So I use MySQL quite a lot. Wildcards are very handy, which is basically where you use things like asterisks and stuff like that to say match any number of characters. And regular expressions are like those, but much more sophisticated, where you can sort of say, I want 4 digits followed by letters A to sort of G or something like that. So they're very worth learning if just because of the productivity gain. 2 minutes, okay. Scraping websites, I can talk about that very quickly. So I use Google Maps and Earth. They're very handy for just plotting things. So programming, yeah, I think everyone should have a go at it just for an hour or so, just to see, because you might have the brain. Some people's brain just clicks. I've seen, I don't know if he's not here tonight, perhaps, but there was a journalist, and he had a whole ton of Excel spreadsheets, which somehow, programmers were just amazed how he'd done this. He was able to sort of scrape data off the BBC website and do something with it and turn it onto a Google map. And we're like, how the hell did you do that with Excel? It was amazing. And he once you showed him how to actually code, he just took to it amazingly. And there's a group I've sort of recently helped start with some other people from the Times, which is called Hacks Hackers, which is where we kind of get journalists and developers to meet up in a pub usually, and we have a couple of presentations, and then we look at actually how to write some code and or just using software, and just so do come along to that. Website scraping. Have we got time for this? No. Okay. Well, basically, website scraping is making an automated way of visiting the website. So you can make the computer act like it's a human in Firefox or something like that, visiting the website. And it's very easy for it to visit thousands of pages and just collect a little bit of data off them, and then you can put all that data onto a spreadsheet. And it just it's like having millions, sort of unlimited number of work experience people. And ScraperWiki is a fantastic tool just for doing that. So you can actually, oh, sorry, I haven't got it in here. I can show you at the end, but basically you can actually just type code straight into your browser and click run, and it will sort of, once you've worked out how to get all the errors out of it, then it will actually just go off and pull the data and put it into a spreadsheet for you. And you can even tell it to just run this every day, every hour, or once every 6 months. And they're having sessions as well, so have a look out for ScraperWiki. And I think I'll skip over this because I think it's a bit over the top, but I'm just sort of saying basically that things are going to get a lot faster as well. We want to move to, sorry. Yeah, I'll make this presentation available. But just I think the future with data is for things to be released as they happen. There's no real reason for this government data to be released sort of on a quarterly basis. If as soon as that project has been approved, it should be sort of, in some database it goes from, red to green, and then that change should be immediately available on the website, and any kind of things which depend on that can recalculate, and that. So I think that's one of the things that we'll be moving forwards to. And that's it. Questions?
Thank you very much. Round of applause, please, Julian. Thank you very much. And just firstly, because someone asked before, your Twitter name is
Aubergine.
Can I ask why it's Aubergine?
It's been that for a very long time. It's just one of those things. There we are.
Okay, good. That solves it.
And spelt wrong as well to make it more unique.
Can I just kick off by asking you one question? Because you went into quite some detail about some of the tools and skills that people can use. But say, if someone had an editorial budget of somewhere close to absolutely nothing, what could they do? What just free tools that are available? I saw that you use Google Docs yourself.
Yeah.
Just an ordinary spreadsheet is good enough to do something meaningful.
I mean, that's surprisingly close to our budget, actually.
Really?
I
don't believe that.
But no, between Johnny and I. So almost all the tools we use are free. So MySQL, and we use Linux as well. So we just rescued an old machine and put Linux on it, Ubuntu, which is very easy. You just download it, put a CD in, it installs. And so yeah, there's a lot of free tools that we use. I mean, I think coming along to Hacks and Hackers is great because then I have more time to sort of explain these things. I'm very happy to sort of go through and talk about them. But yeah, and also just browsing their site as well. There's a very good sort of forum where people talk about what tools they use and found useful.
Okay, so open it to the floor. Has anyone got a question for Julian right now? Or should we wait till the end perhaps? There's a gentleman there again. Okay.
This is if you had... Hello? Oh, it is on, sorry. If you were sort of advising a non-programming journalist to learn one or two programming languages, what would they be? Where should they start?
Well, I think Ruby and Python are very popular at the moment, and they're very powerful for doing, particularly for things like website scraping. JavaScript is a great language to learn because it's already in every browser and you can use it for a lot of display things. So I think starting there, and also a lot of once you learn one language, a lot of it can be quite easily sort of transferred to another. They're not, the differences are quite small. That's why we fight about them so much.
Is there anybody else? We might have time at the end if something just pops up, but. No questions. That means it was a fantastic presentation because he's answered them all. So again, just please put your hands together for Julian. Just get ready with the next one. There you go. Thank you. Yeah. What's the best way to do this? Go. Okay, so moving on to number 3. This is David McCandless, who's a data journalist, and has the website Information is Beautiful.
Yep.
And take it away. Please put a round of applause in for David McCandless.
Thank you. Yep, so I run this website and my passion is really taking data, information, ideas, statistics, all that stuff and making it into images that anyone can understand. That's really what I want to do. So my talk today is making information beautiful is beautiful. I want to take you through my process and I want to importantly tell you how it's relatively easy to do. You don't need programming skills. You don't necessarily even need design skills. It's just simply available to you. This is my visual CV. I wonder if I can make my life look beautiful. I haven't quite succeeded. Quite blocky, horrible colours. But I just wanted to explain a few things about this. I was a programmer as a kid, and then there's a big gap where I had a child, and that part of my brain sort of dropped away. Now, I code a little bit now, but I do a little bit of HTML and not very much. I've worked as a journalist for nearly 20 years. I worked online running websites. I worked in advertising as a copywriter, which is a great conceptual discipline. Advertising has long known the power of a visual image and a small amount of text. And I've only been designing for 4 years. I've never been to design school, never been to art school, never trained as a designer. So I just want to background this as I take you through some of these pieces of work that I've done. Don't know, how many people know this image? Okay, yeah, about half. Right, this is $1 billion a gram. This image arose out of frustration I had with the reporting of billion-dollar amounts in the media, in that they're reported as self-evident facts when in fact they're completely meaningless, without any kind of context. So I scraped a load of amounts and sized the squares accordingly. And then I took the colours here represent the motive behind the money. So red is giving money away, purple is like military, it's cropped a little bit, but that's Iraq at the top, and blue is like making money. So this is a more recent version of the image. It's using 2009 figures. And when you create an image like this, it becomes a landscape that you can explore, and you can see patterns and connections, and you can see links between numbers that would otherwise be distributed across multiple news reports, like OPEC's revenue, 780 billion, and that little pixel in the corner, 3 billion, is their climate change fund. So now this image started off, I had to scrape these billion-dollar amounts to start off with, and I wish I'd had Tim's million infinite electronic interns, because I had to do it manually. This is the spreadsheet we started on, and I had to do the scrapes manually. So you see I'm doing manual Google searches there. 50 billion, site got confining the search to a site, and I went from 1 billion to 200 billion, and then I did every 10 billion, so 210 billion, 300 billion. It's going up and up and up, pulling out all the semi-interesting stories into one document, and then filtering that again to find more interesting stories. So boiling it down, boiling it down, boiling it down. Because your electronic intern has no discrimination. It basically just sucks all the data. So you need a human to just filter it. You need a journalistic kind of vibe. So we created this spreadsheet, and then I sized all the blocks as squares. So these are all the blocks and all the values. I'll just zoom in so you can see. Greece's budget deficit, Titanic. So I'm building this up. I'm using Adobe Illustrator, which is a drawing package. You can get a free copy online. It's a 30-day version. It's incredibly powerful. You can do anything in it. So then I started coloring the images according to these categories that I just explained, giving money away, fighting and stuff. And then I started building it into a map. So I do everything by hand, essentially, which I find keeps me connected to the data, but also you just get that kind of intricacy that you can't normally get with a computer-generated image. So here I'm scaling and shaping. I've got all these rogue elements that I need to fit in at some point. It's like Tetris, essentially. I'm just using that muscle in my brain. So here I'm midway through, and I'm trying to make it all fit. And to me, it's not working. There's a lot of sort of stuff at the top. It's kind of fitting it. And so now it's getting a bit more shape. And notice I'm using grids. Design is always about grids. You won't see them. These grid lines, these turquoise, would you say? Yeah, lines. They help me to structure the diagram, but then when you see the diagram, they're not there, obviously, but there's a sense of order and pleasing to the eye. And I've used the 3 grids, so the horizontal grids, the vertical grids are divided into 3, and the secondary grids, vertical grids are divided into 2. So I can start to shape the thing. It's getting a bit more shape here, and then I sort of round the corners and I got a final image. Now, I have editorialized this. This is a story. I've chosen these blocks. They're cropped slightly at the top, but I've chosen the blocks so that there's a story as you read from left to right. It starts with military at the bottom, then it goes to poverty, then it goes to finance, then it goes to war again, and then downwards there's a rhythm. So you can actually read it from left to right, and it maintains your interest. I've been very careful to structure it so that it has this little story to it, and there's oppositional things and little ironic touches, and I'm trying to mould it journalistically. I'm not just blapping it and making it fit. I'm trying to tell a story with it. And once you've got this landscape, you can dump other things on top of it or add bits to it. So the financial crisis, let's see, doosh. There were 12 billion is the cost of the financial crisis. You stick in Africa's debt, there's a little box there, and this is to eradicate AIDS worldwide, is a figure I just discovered from the University of Ottawa. So it's an information map that you can bolt on. Okay. So that took a while. It started in January, ended in July. I was doing it a little bit each week, so it was a long process. I often start work on paper. Paper is cool to work on because you can really test whether an image or visualization is going to work, because if you share it with someone, it should work on paper. And also, you don't get that digital judge coming in. So if you show someone in a digital space, they're expecting to see something tight, and perfect, and clean and digital. And so their response is not always ideal. But if they're sketching, they see it's a sketch, and they can feed back to you as a sketch. This is the first image I did for my book back in 2007. It's about creationism and evolutionism. It came out like that eventually. It was all structured there. This is about conspiracy theories. I was kind of fascinated whether there was any kind of structure in conspiracy theories. That came out like that, because triangles are more conspiratorial, right? It's the carbon cycle, unbelievably complicated natural cycle, which took me ages to understand, and that came out sort of more illustratively, and you can see how it all connects, and blah, 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 so annoying, and then, sketch out a flow chart, and it comes out like that. So sketching is a really great way to start. Don't get into digital too early because you will get stuck in there. So I did another image. Maybe some of you are familiar with this. Working collaboratively is great. So you can work with designers as well. I worked with a designer on this one, Stephanie Pasavek, who's a great English-American designer. Worked on this image together. This shows it's a concept map to the political spectrum as it percolates down from government and society and culture and beliefs. I love it because it's like, it's not data, it's not information, it's concepts, it's how we might possibly frame the world. I love that. But again, it started off as a spreadsheet. And there's something I want to say about a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet, if you're writing a piece, you're in Word, you have a linear structure. You can only shape your story up and down. You can only paste paragraphs above or below. But if you're working in Excel, I know it sounds obvious, but you've got an extra dimension. You can structure things out left and right. So you can add additional perspectives, ideas, reflections on that axis. So it gives you a bit more flexibility to structure something differently and keep it tidy. And if it's tidy, then it can be pretty much located into a design. It can be pasted. I often use the Excel structure that I built up as the skeleton for the design, as I did here. So I sketched it out for Stephanie, and then she did a first draft, which was like this, which is more or less reflects the spreadsheet I had. And I was kind of like, well, that's pretty good, but... And then this was my feedback to her. I had a Wacom pad. I just got it that week, so I was like really enthusiastically kind of drawing on the computer. So we're working together. We're trying to shape it up, make it good. And then that comes out like this. So it's coming up, and then we want to tighten it. It's still looking a bit compartmentalized. You can still see the spreadsheet in it. So we pushed it together and made it a bit more organic and flowing, and then we've got something that's kind of beautiful and enticing and structured. So that only went through 3 drafts, which is rare for me, because often it takes a lot of time to get these images right. Here's one I did on time travel in movies and films. Not very journalistic, but I just love the idea. Forward in time, backward in time, Star Trek, Back to the Future, all that kind of stuff. I was just curious if there are any patterns or what it looked like. As you can see, I sketched it first, and then we did a digital schematic of it to see if it was going to work. And you can see there's a problem emerging already. There's a clump of digits around time travels around 19th and 20th century. So we laid it out, and it's looking a bit sort of tight. And it's hard to read, and the information is getting lost. Don't quite like it. Looks too tube mappy. Go back to a schematic. Is there a way of fixing it? Yeah, we can telescope it. So instead of doing a linear timeline, let's focus on just the middle section and bunch up the others. So it's like you're holding a piece of rope and you're pulling it. So that was the idea. Oh dear, it's all gone a bit mad. And it's just like, there's something just not quite working for me. So we're back to the drawing board. At this point, the designer left the project. So I took over, and I was thinking, I went back to the concept, I was thinking, well, time travel it's chaotic, it's tunnels, you know, it always is wormholes and that kind of stuff. So it's got to be curves, right? So I drew this curve, and I thought, maybe we do it as a curve. So we started drawing curves. There's another designer on by this time helping me out, younger. So it was shaping it up, and then it has to be on black because sci-fi is black, right? So again, the concept is guiding the design a little bit. So we're moving in, and now we've got a nice shape to it. And the cool thing about this is now we can do this thing where we can mark the points where potentially time travelers from different stories overlap. So Marty McFly and the Star Trek crew battle the Terminator around about 1984, and all these sort of things. And just a little touch to bring out a little sort of thing. So that's time travel. You've got to keep your eyes open when you're working with this stuff, because often stuff comes up that you're not expecting. I don't know if any of you have seen this image. This is a timeline of global media panics. It's like scare stories in the media. I should put a key on this. So the height here is the intensity of a certain story over time. So on the right there, pinky is swine flu. Then you've got yellow, bird flu. Then this kind of, I don't know what that would be, orangey, is SARS. You remember that one? The millennium bug, this grey pop-up here. And then this green flecks, they're asteroid collisions. And then the blue lines at the front, they're killer wasps, which are in fact the most deadly scourge on this map. They're the things that have killed 1,000 people a year killed by wasps. So I visualized this because I just thought, oh, I wonder if there's a pattern in the way media reports stuff. And then what I didn't expect was this. This is the pattern for violent video games. As you can see, there's a regular shape to it. Twin Peaks every year. And if you look closely, they occur at the same month every year, November, April, November, April. Why? Why would that be? Well, November, Christmas video games come out. Perhaps there's an upsurge in concern about the content. But April is kind of a, it's not really a big month for video games. What would possibly push that story into the agenda? Easter holidays, maybe?
Discounts.
Discounts. No. Something a bit more tragic. Well, there is a political edge to it, yeah. Well, if you look back, April 1999 was the Columbine shooting, right? A tragedy that was deeply linked to video games. And since then, there have been retrospectives, copycat shootings, even anniversaries. And those two stories, those two fears, the Columbine shooting and violent video games, have become enmeshed. And memory, it's like we're remembering it every year, pushing back. We can see, I use Google Insights for this tool. It's a great tool that tracks the intensity of keywords over time. This is the correlation. So blue here is, red here is Columbine shooting, blue is violent video games. You see the correlation is almost exact. Those spikes, the anniversaries, I think that's the 8th year anniversary and the 10th year anniversary there. So I didn't expect to see that pattern, and I can only see it when I visualized it. I just thought it was an interesting idea. There was another pattern as well. I don't know if you can see. There's a gap in the scare stories. It affects all the stories mostly, and then they start again. And if you see where the gap starts, September 2001, when we had something very real to be scared about. So I just want to talk about some things that don't work in this field. I've done loads of visuals, about 300 actually. I was working out on the tube, which is average about one every 2 days. Some things that really don't work. You'll see a lot of visuals like this. The technical term is spaghetti. This is when you take in data and you just visualize it, but you don't shape it with a story or a concept or give it some kind of form. You just simply. And for me, information design, data visualization is really about bringing more clarity and removing the noise so that we can see what's important and what's worth focusing on. So it's annoying. That's another kind of spaghetti, a slightly iconographic one. This is an image I did. Often when you give data to a designer, a graphic designer, they'll come and do you a funky, amazing circle. Here's one. Wow, brilliant. But it's completely unusable. You can't get the information out of it. This isn't journalism. Cartograms, you'll see a lot of these as well. They're just ugly, I think. Here the continents are scaled according to the data underneath, but I just think they look ugly. And here, again, a bit of hubris. So I thought I could sum up all the world's religions in a single tweet, which creates a lot of text, and then I'm trying to shape the bubbles according to the number of adherents to that religion. And I've got too much information. It's half an article and it's half a chart. It's a charticle and again, it's like we need to pull. Design is about reducing information. It's about taking stuff out so you can be more simple. So I'll just end on this. I had a think about what possibly works, what makes a great information graphics, what could kind of shape and help guide thinking. As I said, I've never been trained in design, so this is just me playing around with the ideas. Of course, I've done an infographic to explain it for myself. But for me, it seems like an information design is the combination of the best of information and the best of design. The best of information for me is integrity and interestingness. So it's relevant, it's meaningful, it's new, and the data has integrity. It's true and it's consistent, it's accurate. And then for design, the best of design, it's form, it's beautiful, it's well structured, it looks good. And then the function, it's designed for a purpose and it suits that purpose and it fulfills it. So these things meshed together perhaps might make a great information design. Again, I'm not saying this is the truth, this is just me playing with the idea. What's interesting here, and I'll just, short time, but I'll just quickly say, is you can combine two of these elements and you get something interesting. So function and form. So you have something that's quite useful and looks quite good, you create a sketch. Which is useful to share, or something that's interesting and has integrity as a proof of concept before you design it. But if you combine three, it starts to break down and things don't work so well. So if you have something that's interesting, it's got great data, and it looks good, but it has no purpose, then it's, well, I put rubbish there, a little bit pejorative, but it's just useless. And similarly, if you combine something that's useful and it's interesting and it looks great, but the data is rubbish, it has no integrity, then why bother? So odd, unexpected thing. The biggest thing about this, of course, is that it actually is a fail in itself. I put this online, I was like, maybe I've solved this is a Rosetta Stone for infographics. But actually, there's something deeply wrong with this diagram. I don't know if you can tell. Anybody see what's wrong with it? I was immediately assaulted by the internet police. I don't. Okay, you can't do a four-way Venn diagram. Okay, basically function and integrity don't overlap. Interestingness and form don't overlap either. Donk. So there you go. I hope there's some useful tips there. I'm done. Thank you.
Fantastic, really good stuff there. Thank you, David.
Pleasure.
Does anybody have a question straight away for David from the floor? You were first there. So keep on.
Just a quick, curious question. Have you ever
Yeah.
run an analysis on silly season stories in the summer?
That's a great idea, isn't it? Yeah,
Just
like
to
trends, like polar bears sneezing and
Cats in bins.
really hot girls receiving A-levels. That's the big one, isn't it? Jumping in the air. Way! Yeah, that'd be cool. Thank you. That's a great idea.
Okay, anybody else? Don't be shy. There's a gentleman at the front. I'm cautious I'm not taking any from the back. If people have all their answers. Hang on, I'm just going to take the gentleman there.
Hi, Rich Harris at Citywire. You've talked about how you don't have to be a designer to do this kind of stuff, and my first thought is, well, yeah, it's easy for you to say. I think for most of us who would like to be able to do this kind of stuff, it's not that straightforward. Is it more fruitful to train journalists to be designers or to train designers to be journalists?
Great question. Yeah. I personally get annoyed when I hear people say, I'm not a designer, I'm not a journalist, because to me those qualities, you know, while crafts and art, they start off as a bunch of skills that you can simply learn. So I would love to see more designers train as journalists, because there are so many amazing designers in this country, graphic design as well. This country leads the world, but a lot of them just don't have that journalistic now, so they have the story, I'm not a journalist, I don't know what's interesting, I can't tell a story, all this kind of stuff. But everyone has a passion, everyone has an interest they can follow to begin their career. And journalists too, well, I know journalists work very hard, and it does take a lot of time. I have the luxury of being able to work from home and do all that kind of stuff to develop my design. So, I don't know. How many journalists are there in here that actually would be interested in learning how to design? Whoa. Cool. Yeah. Well, maybe I should have a hack shack from my own. Design shack. Okay, cool.
So we have a rudimentary.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't believe design. I think it's inherent. I think we all have a good design sensibility, especially these days when we're looking at design every day in the form of the web. So I think there's a huge amount of latent design potential in everyone.
We'll just take one last one and then we'll...
Yeah, sure.
I'm Greg Hadfield. I'm just interested in your view of the difference between data and information, and then overlaying it. The highest echelon really is insight, or...
Yeah.
It strikes me that the journalism has always been an information game, and then ultimately the insight.
Yeah.
We seem to have gone back a bit in just visualization data. You look at it and think, that's interesting. Do you think that your information visualization always needs textual insight, or is it just like a work of art where the user engages with it and reads that story that you've planted in the information, in the visualization? Does it always need text? That's, I guess, what I'm saying.
I think so, yeah. I see it as the merging of text and design, or information and design, the two combined, both speaking at the same time, both with their own kind of dynamics and strengths, but literally balanced. I think the best works, and I've maybe done a couple that I'm really proud of, that really get that balance right, and there's a sort of harmony there, and they look really interesting, and they're really cool.
It just struck me the molehills was the most interesting visualization.
Right,
because
it had no text.
Well, but it unlocked something that you could write a whole story about.
Yeah.
Story.
Yeah, and in the book actually it is. I've got a key, but it's just really low key to let the shapes. Yeah, it's interesting. The difference between data seems to be the lowest, not in a pejorative sense, but just low, and then information top, then knowledge perhaps, and then maybe insight. I don't know about the strata. Maybe I need to do a graphic on it.
Fantastic. So
Thank you.
Please thank David McCandless.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, you've still got my mic. There you go. Yeah. I'm gonna nick off for this.
with that? Yeah.
I always think it must be a good sign of a good infographic when everyone goes, oh. I saw quite a few people doing that a couple of times in David's talk. So we're on to the last speaker now, and I think we've had some fantastic ones so far. If you look at the frontlineclub.com tomorrow, we'll try and get them all online if the speakers kindly allow us to do that. So, and last but by no means least, please welcome Michael Blastland.
My excuse for doing this is I started a program with Andrew Dillon called More or Less a number of years ago, which we hatched over a pizza, and it's still going. It's in very capable hands. They're not mine anymore, but I kind of evolved an interest in data, particularly, and I teach some of this stuff for the BBC for College of Journalism, among others. And one of the things I want to overcome is the sense that data does the job for you. That there is this genre of journalism where it's all about just kind of getting hold of the stuff and putting it out there. And as we've seen already, I think there's an enormous number of skills that we need to apply in order to do that well. And the one I want to particularly emphasise is that there's no such thing really as data-driven journalism. There is only journalist-driven journalism. It all starts in here. It's a case of, even from the beginning, selecting what kind of data you want. Let alone how you're going to present it, how you're going to visualize it, what sense you're going to make of it. It begins with you, the judgments you make, depending on what sort of story you want to research and so on. And so I think, there are about 4 parts to sort of doing data-driven journalism, and all of them really begin here. One is the hunger, the data hunger, which is the proclivity to use data in the first place. If you're not inclined to do, I mean, a lot of people aren't. You are, because you're here, obviously. There's the data hunting. Now, that's again obvious. It's how you find it. And then there's this key thing, there's the data savvy. I think, it's knowing what to make of the stuff when you've got it. And there's the data presentation. And those last two, I think, are intimately connected, particularly the stuff that Dave is talking about just now. Now, I'm going to assume that you have data hunger. David's done the data presentation. I'm going to concentrate on the couple in the middle, the finding and the understanding. And I think it really does help to know what you're looking for. And if you know how to interrogate it once you find it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some big numbers that have been in the news, and apparently there's something going on in the economy at the moment, apparently, with public spending. And I'm just going to sort of talk a bit about how you can weave your way into those bits of data. But I'm just going to give you a couple of examples at the beginning to show why you need to think about and understand the way that data is generated and what kind of stuff it tells you. Now, immigration has been a significant subject, I think we can say that. And how do we know about immigration? Well, we sample it. And you need to know about sampling. You want to understand about sampling how it works. We sample migration. We have a lot of people in blue blazers. They're called the International Passenger Survey. And they pull people out of the lines, because the only way to find out who's an immigrant is to ask them. You ask people, what is an immigrant? And generally they say, it's something to do with coming here, isn't it? They say, well, for how long? Don't know. To work? Don't know. Student over the summer? Whatever? Don't know. It's an intention to stay for more than 12 months. So you need to understand the definitional concepts behind the data that you're looking at. Now, we sample, as I say, because we can't ask everybody, and we pull these people out of the line. Well, we used to do almost all of that at Heathrow, Gatwick, and Manchester airports. Now, over a period of a couple of years, there was a very large number of flights came in from Poland. Something like 500,000 people. They weren't all migrants, but about 500,000 extra people. Now, how many of them came past the people in blue blazers? Okay, how many of them, in other words, didn't come through the sampling points? This is unfortunate. How many did we pick up outside Heathrow, Gatwick, and Manchester? This is equally important, who turned out to be genuine migrants. Now, we have data. We had the data at the time this was happening. Was it reliable data? How did we know whether it was reliable data or not, simply looking at it? Now, I sort of, my analogy for this is with the FBA's expenses story. It's a great story, brilliantly done by a lot of people. What were we looking for? We kind of knew what we were looking for. What's an abuse of the expenses? We know a duck house when we see a duck house. We all know what a duck house is. How do you know a duck house when you see one in the labour force survey? There's a sort of metaphorical problem, I think. Do you understand the data well enough to recognise what you're seeing? I'll give you. Let's go through one of these things. Unemployment, and just talk about getting through the data for something like unemployment. Because you go onto the ONS website, that notoriously awful conduit for information. It's the sort of non-available available data. You know, it's you wrestle your way through this kind of thing, and you think, well, unemployment was very interesting. It's very interesting at the moment, and I want a big lump of data. I want a big stretch of data because I want to say compare recessions. Reasonable inquiry. How bad is this one compared with the last? And you look at that and you think, oh, I don't know, where do I go? Where do I go? And you might have some deep intuition that actually what you want is time series data. It is up there on the right-hand side, and you sort of work out that that's what you need to get into. And you look at the time series data, and it says LFS summary non-standard LFS time periods, and you think, what the heck, non-standard LFS time periods? What is LFS? LFS is, oh, you might know it's the labour force survey, and after going through about 16 different options, perhaps you'll decide that you do want labour force non-standard time periods, and you get another 20 options, and you think, do I want in employment all ages? Do I want it seasonally adjusted? Do I what do I want? You know, really. And by luck, or maybe judgment, or maybe asking somebody who knows their way through this kind of thing, you might finally get a usable set of data which you can put into an Excel spreadsheet, and you can chart it very easily. Or any other, you can just cut and paste that sort of stuff, hoover it up one way or another, and you can compare this recession with the last recession, and actually it's rather interesting. And in the early months, when we could see unemployment going up, and there was a lot said about how we were going to hit 3 million and so on, and there were no adjustments for the actual size of the workforce. And there was no comparison that I saw in the early period with the previous recessions and the rates of increase and the point from which we were starting and various other things. But once you get there, you can start working out what sort of story you can tell, and you've visualized it in a very simple form. I'll give you I mean, the ONS is not good, and the OS, they know they're not good. Well, it's fantastic. It's the most extraordinary resource if you can find your way in there. The people who work there, they know where all the skeletons are. They know all the wrinkles in the data. They are the most fabulously well-informed people about UK data you can find. The only problem is that they don't want to tell you anything about it because they're frightened. And so we have this awful problem, you know, of the best information being the most closely guarded secret. In the UK, we talk about getting the information out there. I strongly feel that getting information out there is not just about getting data out there. This hierarchy that David proposed at the end, you start off with information, and then there's the data, and then there's information, and then there's knowledge. Now, you know, the ONS simply putting the stuff out there is one thing. Telling you what they think about it. Now, if we could get them to do that, it would be a big prize. So, you know, this is the mantra, you know, just give us the data. Yes, but give us the interpretation, give us the understanding as well. Another little story, GDP. I beg your pardon. Oh, that's just another illustration. I was browsing randomly on the ONS website. I thought, let's have a look at, I don't know, gender. And it offered me a couple of categories, and I thought, they sound interesting. Let's click on gender composition of defence personnel. I'd love to know that. And okay, it happens a lot. It happens a lot. Anyway, talking about another big economic story, which is the UK economy. And an aspect of it that I want to try and show how knowledge of the way that data works can be important in interpreting the story. So the economy contracted very fast in 2009. The decline was more severe, this is the interesting bit, more severe than the early estimate of 1.9%. That's a huge adjustment. 0.5% adjustment on GDP is enormous when we were quibbling about whether we had growth of 0.1 or 0 or minus 0.1. So the scope for these figures to be adjusted is fantastic. Well, there was some discussion of this in the newspapers, and the ONS responded. Actually, the average, we're pretty good. We're pretty good. On average, we're only 0.2 percentage points out. Now, that's still the difference between growth and recession, but never mind. We're only 0.2 out on average. On average. Tell me the average number of human feet. What's the average, the mean?
Less than 2.
It's less than 2. Almost everybody has more than the average number of feet. Okay. Now, the average is a very simple concept, the mean. We think it's somehow representative of what's normal, typical. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. There are different averages, as somebody implied. But just that sense that an average can conceal some really skewed landscapes in the background. So when the ONS says, as it did in that letter to the Times, actually our average error is only 0.2%, I'm kind of not interested. I want to know what your extreme errors are. I want to know how likely and by how much you might be wrong this time. Okay? So just another little illustration of the average. Here's equivalized household income, pounds per week. You can see, actually, that about 2/3 of people earn less than average. Understanding, less than the mean, understanding what kind of average you want to be representative, what's going to really capture the sort of story you're trying to tell, how accurate is the ONS, what's the typical experience there, depends on you understanding some of these basic concepts. Back to looking for gross domestic product, I thought you put the search in and you get these, and it says, we recommend gross domestic product per head, and I thought, okay, I'll have a look at that. So you go back to your main menu again, and you think GDP revision. Oh, revisions! Try it. That's a little more interesting. The revisions now, because we're interested in revisions, and you might, if you're lucky, stumble on this, which is the revisions triangle, and it shows quarter by quarter, month by month, how much revision there's been of the ONS data on GDP. And then it kind of gets interesting, because this is the sort of stuff you can work with. Great advantage of a lot of ONS data, it is in usable formats. Some of it's PDF, but not much anymore. And you can graph it, and you can compare the first estimate with the latest estimate. And that's still not too good, because I really want to know the size of the adjustments. And then I can do that, and I can find that, how do they get 0.2 out of that? Because we're looking even in recent months, recent years, we're looking at adjustments of 0.6, 0.4. Go back a bit, you're looking at 0.9. 0.9% adjustment on quarterly data is phenomenal. I think, how did they get 0.2? Well, they get 0.2. There's 72 quarters shown there. 18 of them show 0.5 percentage points revisions of GDP or more. So these are revisions, by the way. They're not growth. Below the line doesn't mean we were shrinking above the line. It just means how much it was revised by and in which direction. And one of the things the ONS says, well, these are not our fault. These are not problems with our sampling methodology. It's because we made a big readjustment to the way that we do the whole thing. Okay, probably because the OECD told us to do it or something like that. So these are not our fault. Basically, our methods are perfectly reliable. It's somebody else's imposition that's caused our data to be heavily adjusted. And you think, oh, well, that's okay then. It's a different kind of uncertainty. I'm cool with that. I don't mind. For those of us who really want to know how well does GDP represent what's going on out there, the sources of uncertainty are a bit academic. But the scale at which they exist is not at all well known. And it's phenomenal. And how do we get to that? Because we can understand what the idea of an average conceals. How long have I got? About 3 minutes. OK, I'm just going to whisk through a couple of other things. Counting stuff. Again, you assume you go out and count there. Again, just an illustration of just giving us the data. The Census Bureau in the United States decided they wanted to count the number of people over 100. It does. It has a census every year. There are two figures on there. There are a number of people who said they were over 100 and a number of people the Census Bureau thinks are really over 100. And what the heck happened in 1970 is really anybody's guess. I mean, my theory is that it is 1970, it's the end of the 60s, and they were all on acid. I'm over 100, man. I was over 100 in the last life as well. It's that kind of problem. And having raw data, just give us the data. I don't want my data just raw. I want it cross-checked with other sources like the Social Security data. I want it aggregated, because I don't want to add up all those lists of ones and zeros that come on a lot of the surveys myself. I want it weighted. With the income data, I want it equivalized. And if you don't know what all those things mean, then you don't really know what data is like when it's raw. And all those things are very important to us to understanding what data is really about. OK, I'm going to move on, because I just want to... should we do norovirus? Winter vomiting disease? It's great stories about inquiring how we get data. Because we all, this comes up every year. This is a couple of years old now, but it comes up every year. This is a non-ONS. I just wanted to give you a non-ONS example, but about how we know that the cases hit 3 million. Well, how do we know? Because we collect data with bureaucrats, don't we? They're all out there with the crit boards, basically, and they're spying on you in your bathroom. And there's 2,973,000 vomits this year. No, they're not. They take a sample and they extrapolate from it. But where do they get the baseline data that says we know how our sample relates to the whole population? You know, it pays to understand how how these things are generated. And what they did is they did a survey many years ago now in which they went to a number of small towns and they said, how many people go to their GP with this thing? How many of those cases are referred to hospital lab for confirmation? How many of those are confirmed? How does that relate, because we did a door-to-door survey, to the number of people complaining of stomach bugs out in the community? And you get a ratio, lab cases to people out there. And so the idea is that there are 3 million. We reckon that for every lab case confirmed, there are 1,500 in the community. Okay? But this was some time ago. It's only in one place. That's how we get 3 million, by the way, because there were 2,000 lab cases. Those are all that we've counted in that year. We just multiplied it by 1,500 to get the 3 million number. And this is how we get this kind of data. But maybe they said there weren't 1,500 out there because this was a small sample. It was some years ago. We're not absolutely sure. Maybe there were only 170 cases out there, in which case there'd have been 340,000 cases that year, not the 3 million. They also said it was possible that maybe there were 17,000 cases out there for every one that went to the lab and was confirmed, in which case there would have been 34 million of us vomiting that winter, which I think we'd have noticed. Now, these are known as confidence intervals. You know, how sure are you that your number, the number you've given in the middle, is accurate? These are the widest confidence intervals I've ever seen in my life. You know, they're absolutely phenomenal. Why are they so wide? Well, if you go in and you have a look at that original survey and you look at the number of laboratory positive cases when they set up the ratio right at the beginning, there you go. They extrapolated basically from a sample of 1. How do we collect the stuff? Where do we get it from? Who does the counting? Why are they counting it? What kind of concepts are they using? What kind of definitions are they using? You need to be alert to all of these things when you're thinking about collecting your data. I'm going to do one more, if I've got time, just on public spending, because it's very relevant at the moment. Because you know, the ways in which we talk about public spending, there are myriad ways in which you know, this is easily obtainable data in some ways. Some bits of it. Some bits are easy, some bits are hard. I'm going to tell you 3 stories about public spending on defence. It'll be the same when they all stop going down again. We just haven't seen what they're going to do when they go down yet. But this is about stuff going up. All right, defence spending, very relevant. We can see that, as Gordon Brown said not long ago, it's increased substantially over the years, and previous administrations would have been able to say the same. But of course, it's not adjusted for inflation. So if we have a look at real terms spending on defence, and we suddenly see this rather interesting line suggesting that very early in the Thatcher administration, there was a collapse in real terms spending. I won't call it a collapse. There was a substantial 25% fall. We're talking about, people sometimes say 25% cuts. We've never seen anything like it before. We've seen 25% cuts, real terms, in defence spending before. That's happened. That's happened frequently, actually, since, well, not in real terms. Because there's another one as well. Coming back to David's problem about counting billions, because all these are in billions, can we find a consistent basis? This is my answer to the problem of billions, that there is such a consistent basis, and it's as a proportion of GDP. I call it the 100 test, because you're calculating everything as a share of 100. And you can show that one as well. And you can see that actually the national commitment to defence has shrunk rather, and that shrinking goes back a very, very long time, since basically the Korean War. Roughly, you even out some of the lumps and bumps. And certainly Labour's revival in defence spending, which it claims to have done in real terms, does not indicate a growing commitment to defence as a share of national resources. So how do we get to that one? We get to that because we have a rough understanding of the different senses in which we can talk about things going up or down, and the different ways in which you can measure them, real terms, nominal, shares of GDP, and so on. Incidentally, I think one of the biggest shocks to public spending is going to come in health, which is, we all believe, the protected one. And that's because Andrew Lansley has talked about stopping its increase as a share of GDP. So it's about 8. On the 100 test, it's about 8 at the moment. He says it's going to stay there. Can't go up anymore. Never, in any developed country, in the last years, the history of the modern welfare state, has that ever happened, with one exception, which is Sweden. The magnitude of that change, which is in a protected area, I think is going to be the biggest shock in any public service in the UK. If you think about it in terms of the 100 test, I think that's a very relevant test. I'll stop. Finding your data is tough. Knowing what kind of data you're finding is even harder. But I think you do need to know what data does, how it behaves and how it misbehaves in order to start making sense of it and start doing some of the wonderful things that some of my colleagues have been showing us how to do. Thankfully, we don't need the ONS site anymore because we have the Guardian, which I'm mightily relieved to hear. Thanks very much.
It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And I'll just open to questions in a second. But if I could just ask one, just to reiterate something you were saying then, the story you showed was 3 million people suffering from norovirus that winter.
Yeah.
And that was from a sample of?
That's from a sample of 2,000.
2,000.
But using a ratio of 1 to 1,500.
Yeah. So how does that story then end up being 3 million? What are people actually doing wrong? I mean, what does the ONS then do to that data?
It's Health Protection Agency, which gives that number out as a central estimate, so 3 million. But they careful. I mean, they do say in there that, you know, the confidence intervals are, you know, it could be 170,000, 340,000, it could be, 34 million. You know, and if you look at that and you think, blimey, well, if it could be that, why am I reporting one number in the middle of this thing? You know, when essentially they're saying we haven't got the faintest idea what the real number of, of vomiters are out there. I've forgotten something, but if you've got time, I'll just show you an animation.
For the journalists that are here, do you think it's a good idea to believe any official statistic?
No, I mean, you know, the ONS ones are accurate, but the, even the ONS, for whom I have enormous respect, you know, I think a tremendous ability in there and just the most extraordinary range of data. But even the ONS talking about its average revisions, and you think, oh, they like to think that they're right, you know. And you know, one of the things that I've sometimes said to people in the ONS, and I know other friends of mine in the business have said, is that your data's always wrong, you know. And they go, what? How dare you? You know, and so, well, because data is, you know. The important thing is how wrong. You know, can we use it? Is it reliable enough to use it, or is it just so far off the planet that, you know, actually, now what do we do? You know.
So does anyone have something to say? There was a lady, I think, with her hand first.
Hi, I just wondered if you have any recommendations for any kind of idiot's guides to statistics.
Well, I tried to write one. An idiot. So who's the idiot? I tried to write one which is called The Tiger That Isn't, and it's about understanding numbers in the news. But there are some other very good people who've done this. Joel Best is a writer. It was written an American. He's done a thing called Stat Spotting, which I recommend. How to lies, damn lies, and statistics, and more damn lies and statistics. So he's got 3 to his name. There's a little genre. Joel Best. Stat Spotting, I think, is one of the best. But I can recommend some others later if you want to.
Okay. So there was a book in the 50s, How to Lie with
Statistics by Darrell Huff.
What's new now about this? I mean, this has been going on for hundreds of years. What's new today?
Well, I think what's new is the volume of data that's available, because we're constantly developing new ways of aggregating things, you know, and we've got new things like school league tables, for example, which just weren't around to the extent in the 1950s. We've got international comparisons and rankings, which we do a plethora of these kind of things spring up. So there are new kinds of, you know, information that we're conveying using data. We've got the kind of machines that can crunch data on much, much larger scale now to produce more reliable numbers about big social changes. So working out what can go wrong with those sort of things and talking about. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's still a classic, and a lot of it is still relevant. And one of the horrors about data journalism is that the same things keep coming up all over, you know, every time. Pretty disappointing. Do you want to show me shall I show you my animation?
Please do.
I wanted to show this because we had a conversation early on, because I mean, I think animation just has fantastic potential, and I know David's thinking about it, and I'm sure his designs will knock mine into a hat. But here's a concept, okay? Relative poverty is 60% of the median. It's another kind of average. And the confusion you see about this kind of thing, you know, in press reporting, some people say, oh, well, that's a relative number then, isn't it? 60% of that means it's just like inequality. So we devised this thing. allowing people to play with the data and understand how the concept works. So now I can find some of these things and I can say, okay, so it's rich people, is it? Let's move some of the rich people and see what happens to the poverty line. Well, nothing, actually. I can make all those people exceedingly rich and it doesn't do anything. So clearly it's not the same as inequality. But here's the weird thing. I can make this person a bit richer and I can make all those people poor without changing their income at all. So, you know, you have to understand that this is relative in some sense, but it's relative to the middle. And then you think, well, can I make nobody poor? Now, this is going to be interesting. Let's see if we can make nobody poor at all. Anybody can work out what it is that I'm going to do in order to make nobody poor. Gets a free pint in a minute. But here we go. I can make nobody poor at all by giving nobody any money. Isn't it fantastic? So, you know, and you can, so having some sort of interactive animated design which allows people to play with the concept, I think is potentially very useful. You know, this is a sort of, it's terribly didactic, isn't it? It's the BBC for you. It's done that to me. But it could work. It could be very useful, I think. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Good stuff. Just to end, does anybody have a question for Michael or for any of the other speakers tonight? I can drag them up again. Is there anything burning in the back of your mind? There's one there. You say who's your question to, and we'll try and get them to answer.
Just a question for Michael. We've talked about how it's journalists don't need to be computer programmers and journalists don't need to be designers. Do you feel that journalists don't need to be statisticians either?
I'm an English graduate.
Well done.
Yeah. I'm one of those humanities people that current affairs is stocked with. Sorry. Yeah. So no excuse, really. And one of the ways I got into it was by asking a lot of downfall questions about. So when we count migrants, who are they? How do we count them? You know, I mean, there's the daft laddie question, as they say, about where I come from. Yeah. No, you don't need to be a statistician. You don't need any training in any numerical skills. Other than a thirst for it and a willingness to treat this as a language rather than some kind of arcane and forbidding sort of otherworldly jargon. It's just a language that describes things.
Okay, and just one from another.
I just want to add something to that, which is that actually I think there's a lot of kind of fear. Journalists get press releases from things like the Health Protection Agency, and they see a number on there, and because they don't quite understand where it comes from, don't really have a question like the deficit compared to the national debt. How many people really know what that is? And I've had conversations with people in my office who write about this, who don't actually understand what the difference is. And I think there's that kind of, it's just like asking idiot questions, isn't it? It's just asking the stupid question because you don't understand, not worrying you might be stupid because you don't understand it, because very few people do.
Because you can bet that if you don't, a lot of your readers or viewers or whatever, listeners, they won't understand it either, and they'll be as confused as everybody else.
Maybe just one or two more. You were first, I think, and then I think it was the gentleman there.
This is a question really to everyone. I was wondering whether you all do different parts. Has anyone ever decided to do it, everything from the beginning to the end, as in not even wait for data to come out, crowdsource, collect it, clean it, visualize it, and do a full investigation without even waiting anything to come your way?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of the stuff that we do is with Guardian-generated data. So things like, you know, we do this research into how much people get paid to work for the FTSE 100 companies, you know, which is basically data collected by our journalists, which we then, you know, turn to a spreadsheet and we'll publish the data, and then we'll kind of make it work so that the graphics people can look at it, and then but then we'll also put it out there for people to come up with stories. Is that what you mean? Sorry. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I think a news organisation needs to be able to handle all of those bits of the process, because that's where you get kind of exclusive stories from.
David, do you want to come back on? Would you mind standing up? Sure.
There's a little point to make that it's like we have the A-team here, right? The four of us, we should collaborate on something to do something cool, right? To build like a jalopy in a garage in 2 minutes. But it just feels like, you know, with representative of certain disciplines, it'd be good to do something. Perhaps. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay. If we could be the sort of midwife of that, I'd be very happy. Okay, I mean, we'll have to be the last one.
All right, well, I've got a project for you. It seems to me that there's a huge set of data out there, publicly available, that no one has tried to put forward in a journalistic sense, and that's the genome, because it's an incredibly important. This research is very, very important for understanding the history of humanity and also where our society is going. And yet, if you have ever tried to look at a genome browser, and the genome browsers do exist, but they are awful. They're just terrible. Certain universities have brought them out, and they're very, very difficult to understand unless you've got a PhD in genomics. So it seems to me that there's, perhaps particularly for David, a great potential for that to be visualized in an understandable way, looking at selective pressures and diseases, because they've made us.
Such a great idea. Is there something? Is there a reply to that? Are you going to decode the human genome? And then...
I'll make a joke this time. I can only really visualize what I understand, and I simply don't understand the genome. I'm not sure we do either as a species. Yeah, that's all I had to say really.
Something similar with that for retroviruses that are ancient retroviruses are now embedded in our DNA, and there are people looking at the history of retrovirus evolution by mining the genome of all the junk DNA that we have, and they're looking to extract pieces.
I think you two should.
You should get together. We can discuss how to decode the human genome through infographics just after this event. So all you have to do is please join me in thanking all the speakers tonight.